Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I've been going for a while, but decided to finally start uploading again on YouTube. And today I'm actually reading a story from my second book, More Tales to Never Sleep. This one is called The Political Deal. I was in my room scrolling through my phone and seeing all my friends having a great time, just like every Saturday, but I had to stay home because my dad didn't want me hanging out with middle-class people. My mom came in. Hey, your dad's press conference is about to come on. I sighed, annoyed by this, mostly because my father was a massive dick. He only cared about power and political game. My grandfather owned a successful hotel, and after his death, my father was his only child, so of course he inherited the hotel and all of his money. My dad went on to write a book on how the younger generation was just lazy and that they needed to work harder and not blame rich people. He then went on to make $500,000 off of it. After that, he then decided to run for mayor of Houston, and he won in a landslide. Mostly because his opponent didn't have much money for campaigning, so my dad was able to buy the election. He was able to get his face on a billboard, get a bunch of commercials, and make himself look well rested and prepared on the debate stage. Ever since becoming mayor, he would always put himself in the spotlight, try getting interviews with any news station or radio talk show. We never really did much together, and he only had me by his side when he tried showing me off while he was campaigning himself to be a family man. My mom, on the other hand, was his trophy wife, as she would stay home and do the cooking, cleaning, and taking care of me. We sat in front of the TV as my dad went in front of the cameras and said how he was going to work closely with the sheriff and the police department to get the crime rate down in the city. He didn't actually care. He once said he'd do something about the homelessness in Houston, but instead of actually doing something, he had the police harass the homeless until they eventually left for another town and weren't his problem anymore. He only said this stuff to keep his approval rating high, because he was hoping to become the next governor of Texas. All I know is that when I turn 18, I'm getting the hell out of Texas if he ever becomes governor. My mom sat there clapping, and I sighed, annoyed by this. My mom could tell that I didn't care and slapped the back of my head. Show some respect for your father. I was annoyed by this with how she stood by him. He can go on and say he was going to have all the kids of Houston thrown into labor camps and work all day. And all she would do is smile and stand by him like nothing was going on at all. He had her wrapped around his finger. I guess she didn't care because she got to live in luxury. My dad would constantly cheat on her. Instead of spending time with her, he would go golfing with some CEOs. These were people who donated to his campaign, so he made a bunch of shady deals with them to stay on their good side. As long as he kept them happy, they would help him campaign for governor in the future. Who knows? He's probably going to run for president one day. He's ignored the middle class and only really cares for the rich. He shows up to events to get a good picture of himself for the newspaper. He goes to church on Sunday, not because he's a religious person, but to make himself look like a good Baptist to the public eye. That night when my father came home, he looked at us and said, "You see me on the news?" My mom went over and kissed his cheek and then pulled his dinner out of the microwave for him. "You were great, honey. You're a great mayor." My dad sat down and ate his dinner, then looked over at me. "So, son, how about you be a real man and try out for a school sport?" I sighed annoyed as my dad tried getting me to play sports, just to make his image look better to the public eye. "Dad, I'm not playing a sport." He gave me that look he always does and said what he always says, that I should be grateful for what I have and that a bunch of kids who'd gladly take my place. He then pulled his phone out and started texting someone, probably his affair partner. I saw the look on his face change, and he looked pale as he put his phone down and said, "I'm going to be busy tomorrow, so I'm going to head to bed now." He then got up from the table and proceeded to go into his room and slam the door shut. I was confused by this, and my mom told me he was fine and that he was just a busy man. A few days passed and my dad has still been acting differently, and I couldn't tell why. He's been nervous and has been staying at the mayor's office for long hours into the night. He's barely home when he is. He just eats his dinner in silence. Even during a press conference, he looked nervous out there and stumbled over his words. I couldn't tell what was wrong with him and why he was acting this way all of a sudden. My mom was really worried for him, but he wouldn't talk to her and mostly ignored her. He even started drinking. I mostly avoided him whenever I could and decided it was best to leave him alone. One day when my dad was at work, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I can see a man sitting there, wearing a tuxedo and a top hat. When he saw me, he took it off. He was tall and had blonde, curly hair. He looked like one of the businessmen that my dad meets with. He shook my hand and greeted me with a friendly smile. "Hello, is your father here?" I assumed he was another CEO and told him my dad wasn't here. He frowned and then handed me a note. "Well, when you see him, give him this." He then left and I looked down the card in curiosity, and all it said was, "Remember our deal." It had no name on it or anything, and this confused me. Probably just another corrupt deal my dad made. That night, my dad returned home, and like usual, he would start drinking. I decided to tell him a man showed up and wanted me to give him this. I showed him the note, and he had the most worried look on his face. He then went into his room and locked the door and didn't talk to us for the rest of the night. My dad stopped doing things like going out to golf or meeting with his shady business friends. He looked like a shell of his former self. I didn't know how he would go on. This was until one day when he went on to make a speech in front of a group of reporters and said that he was resigning from the mayor's office. This surprised all of us and we didn't know what to think. I then remembered that card and read it again. What did it mean? Did it have anything to do with my dad resigning? Soon my parents' marriage started to fall apart and my mom would meet men behind his back. My father was either clueless about it or didn't care anymore. One night as he was sleeping, I woke up to the sound of my father screaming. My mom was out, so I decided to see why he was screaming. I went into the living room and was startled. My dad was laying on the floor, and sitting there was the man who gave me the note. He looked at me and smiled before saying, "Don't worry, I'll be leaving. Your dad and I made a deal for when he ran for mayor. I was just making sure that he kept his end of the deal." He was about to leave, but then looked back at me and said, "A soul for a soul." He then left, and I looked down at my father's lifeless body. I then remembered the note and realized what it meant. My dad had traded his soul for political power, and now look at him. He had finally completed his end of the bargain. Justice was finally brought to him. If you enjoyed that story, please feel free to go on Amazon and order a copy for yourself. More Tales to Never Sleep. A book with short horror stories in it, which is also a sequel to my other book, Tales to Never Sleep. If you enjoyed, I hope you do decide to go check it out. Thank you. Stay safe and have a good night.